This isn't the United States House of Free Stuff. Stop kissing each other's rear ends, asking and begging for some slot on a committee. Who's going to have power? And the answer is anybody but the American people.
Political response.
What's up, everybody? Thanks for tuning in. We got another episode of Legitimate Response. And this one, this politician in this clip I'm about to show you took the words right out of my mouth. It's something I've been thinking for a long time. That's something that needs to change with this because there's too much BS in politics right now. Politicians only seem to be thinking about themselves and their position versus representing their constituents when they're in Washington doing their job that they were elected to do. It just seems like they don't care. And when you start paying attention to politics, you'll see that. Whether they do or not, I really don't know. Some of the politicians I see seem to care. Most of them don't seem to care. But it's very hard to tell because 90% of all politicians are lawyers. I'd probably say like 95% of all politicians are lawyers, which, if you've ever heard that old saying that show me a liar and I'll show you a lawyer, they didn't make that up for no reason. Lawyers are very good at deceit, which is why they're very good at law most of the time. But this guy, he's a congressman. He represents District by Houston, Texas. Chip Roy. He takes the words right out of my mouth. Watch this.
Some are saying it's an end of an era, and I would say that it's only an end of an era if we choose to make it so. Bills that are cooked up in small rooms among leadership staff and members of leadership. Thousands of pages of legislation dropped on members at the 11th hour. Key pieces of legislation that are shuttled through committee without significant debate and then dropped on the floor. Sometimes we have what's called suspension votes, where we suspend the rules and we have votes on the floor with no members here to debate it or discuss it. Just take the word of the committees on which I don't serve. Amendments on the floor of this body restrained since May of 2016 under both parties' leadership. Some people refer to this as a cartel. Some refer to it as the swamp. What it is, regardless of branding, we know that it takes power away from the legislators and thereby takes power away from the people who sent their legislators here to represent them. The only way we're going to make this the end of an era is if we change the way we do things. And we should. And I'm saying this now that there is a Republican majority about to take the gavel. I believe we have to change the way this town works. I believe we have to change the way this body works. The reason that I introduced the Article 1 Act in the first Congress that I served in this body while President Trump was in office to reclaim power from the executive branch, to say that we must have a voice in these ongoing emergency declarations, some of which date back to the 1970s. The reason that I did that was because I believed it, even though it would have taken power away from a Republican president. I'm wondering now if some of my Democratic colleagues will think, well, maybe that's not a terrible idea if we look ahead. I don't know. Here in this chamber, I am as a Republican calling on a fundamental change in the way we do things here, how bills get to the floor. Most people might not understand that the default rules that would go back to the Jefferson Manual and the basic rules of parliamentary procedure would be that I have the right to be able to offer a bill, and that then you'd have the right to amend the bill here on the floor of this body, this being the floor of the House of Representatives. But what the American people don't know is that every Congress we come in and we vote on new rules. And we vote on rules that then restrict the power of every member of this body to be able to represent their constituents. We restrict the power of a member to offer a bill, to bring that bill to a vote, to have debate on that bill, to amend that bill here on the floor of the House of Representatives. That's the way it works. And then we even go further. Every week we fly in and then we have votes on rules that are cooked up among 13 members of the House of Representatives who sit up in a committee up here behind these walls, and they vote a new rule. Send it down here, and then the body votes on the rule, that then structures debate for the week. Then can I offer an amendment here on the floor? No. And you know why? Because people are afraid to vote. Members of this body sent to vote on legislation and to represent their constituents are afraid to vote. Can you imagine? The founding of this country, the establishment of this body, the people's house, to go get reelected every 2 years, or to go seek reelection, that we're afraid to vote? Do you know how many times by bring up opening the process and opening up the floor of the House, colleagues on my side of the aisle, the other side of the aisle go, well, don't you know, that means somebody could bring up a really tough vote. Well, if you vote no on a whole lot of tough votes, like I tend to do, you get kind of used to it. And you get used to what you have to do, which is go explain to your constituents why there ain't no free lunch. This isn't the United States House of free stuff. You can't just keep passing bills to spend money we don't have to buy off votes. You can't keep voting for bills that have a nice title so that you don't have to go back and explain why you voted, as I did, against burn pit legislation for veterans who need support and help for burn pits. But you vote against it because you don't need another $675 billion mandatory spending item. Yet bipartisan support for a bill because nobody wants to go say no. Nobody wants to go look in a veteran's eye and explain the hard reality of what we need to do in this body. Nobody wants to say no to a bill that says ALS research. Nobody wants to say no to a bill that says something about helping animals or helping old people or helping kids. You put a nice title in there and everybody's got to vote for it. Doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on, you got to vote for it. Because there is no spending limit. There is no restraint. There is no responsibility. There is no leadership. There is no check on unrestrained power of the executive branch by this body, because this body keeps funding the very tyranny of the executive branch that many campaign against. That's the truth. My colleagues on this side of the aisle just went out and sought election, where we took the House back. My colleagues on this side of the aisle went out and campaigned against unrestrained federal power in the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a Department of Homeland Security that refuses to secure the border of the United States, labeling of parents as domestic terrorists. They went out and campaigned against an energy policy of an administration that is destroying American energy, driving the price of gas up, driving the price of electricity up, destroying the grid of the United States, making us more dependent on China, on Venezuela, on Russia, on Saudi Arabia, on Iran. It's absurd. We ran against all that stuff. But you know what? Whole lot of my colleagues vote to fund all that stuff. Have no problem writing a big old check, both sides of the aisle. You know why? Because they always have something they want that they're willing to just sign off on a monster piece of legislation, irrespective of the debt that is piling up around the ears of their kids and their grandkids, the destruction of the American dream that is happening because of that, or the funding of the very bureaucrats that are undermining the freedoms of the United States people every day. Come to the floor, it's got a National Defense Authorization Act. You come to the floor and you've got something you must pass. We have to pay for the pay raise for our troops. We must pay for some more planes and bombers and helicopters, missiles. Don't you know, Chip, that we've got to go stand up against China. We got to fund Ukraine. We got to stand up against Putin. Great. Let's have a debate on this floor about those things. If you're talking about war, maybe we should declare it. If you think that there's a proxy war with funding, maybe we should debate it on the floor of this body. Maybe you shouldn't just keep writing blank checks and never have a debate about guns and butter. But that's what we do. And this is where I got to have a little tough talk to my colleagues on this side of the aisle. What, pray tell, have you heard out of anybody on this side of the aisle that will change any of that? Yesterday, we had all sorts of conference meetings, debates about our internal workings. I tend to like to keep those meetings confidential and private, but half my daggum colleagues are tweeting that stuff out in real time. The fact of the matter is, nothing changed. The status quo remains because people want their power. They want their committee chairmanships. They want their gavel. They want the ability to control the power and the purse strings but they don't want to look in the mirror to fundamentally change a broken town, a broken house, a broken body, a broken federal government that is stepping all over the dreams and the hopes and the future and the prosperity of the American people. There is not a remote indication that my colleagues on my side of the aisle understand what time it is in America, understand what we're facing. It's not just a campaign statement. It's not just something to go rile up the American people to get elected, to get power, to get on a certain committee. Do you know what every conversation that has been had in this body, at least on my side of the aisle, since last Tuesday? What's going on in the steering committee? Hey, who's going to get Ways and Means? Hey, who's going to get on what committee? Hey, did the freshmen have their vote? Who's going to be the head of the freshman class? Hey, who's going to be the speaker? Who's going to be the whip? I don't know. Let's figure out what we're going to do. Who's going to have power? Who's going to have power? Who's going to have power? And the answer is anybody but the American people. The answer is anybody but the rank and file members of this body. The answer is the status quo. That's why people ran. That's why President Trump, by the way, did well in 2016 running against the swamp. Say what you want about President Trump. He represented a large block of this country that were sick and tired of this town, of this place, of this body, of the people in this room. And it's high time we do something about it. Stop kissing each other's rear ends, asking and begging for some slot on a committee. We didn't come here to be on committees. We didn't come here to get a title. Oh, the titles around this place. Who is in leadership? Leadership. Isn't leadership something you recognize and follow? It's not something you elect. The currency of this town. How you going to take care? How you going to get a bridge back home? Hey, it's important. We have floods in Houston. We have floods in Louisiana or Florida. So, they need flood money, right? Oh, we have tornadoes in the Midwest. Well, we need some tornado money.
Now, I wasn't planning on butting in right here. I was going to let him speak his piece and then give a little speech at the end and then wrap everything up. But the funny thing is, after I heard this, I decided that I was going to go and look up my congressman and email him a copy of this video whenever I'm done with it. And lo and behold, I was reading his bio, and he apparently just got funding for Hurricane Laura relief. 2 years after Hurricane Laura, and he's still getting money. And I haven't seen a bit of it. I don't know what's going on with that. I don't know if it's actually going to be put into our area to help rebuild. But it was just funny he said that. So let's keep rolling.
How do you think you get people to buy? How do you think you get people to vote for all these appropriations bills that have left your country $32 trillion in debt? By the way, 5% interest rates. Do you know what's going to happen? Interest rates going up where they are at 5%. You know what's going to happen to the interest payments? It's going to be another $600-800 billion. You pretty much just bought a whole second Department of Defense, ladies and gentlemen, with money that you're printing. How's that sound? Enjoy that, do you? And nobody here has any plan on what to do about it except more of the same. Oh, we'll have a lot of speeches about CHIP. Don't you understand? Entitlements, mandatory spending, that's the problem. That's 70% of the whole thing. Well, as a technical matter, that's not incorrect. But we got here because we refused to deal with it. And that's not an excuse to write a blank check for discretionary spending. Hey, we don't need to be responsible on discretionary spending because the actual problem is the rest of the spending. Even though discretionary spending is still $1.5, 1.6, 1.8, $2 trillion.
Now, regardless of how true all this is, if it's 100% true or if it's a little bit true and how genuine he really is about this, I know he's not doing it to get favor of more congressmen and congresswomen because he probably just pissed a bunch of people off with that speech. And it may be just so he gets reelected again. He may have done it for his constituents to say that he's fighting for them. Regardless of that, he's right. Something needs to change in Washington, and the only people that can do that is us. Like I said, I was going to email my congressman a copy of this very video to let him know how I feel. I think we should all do that. Not necessarily, I'm not going to ask y'all to go record this video and send it to whoever your congressman is, but shoot him an email. Tell him how you feel, regardless of how you feel. Let them know what's going on. Let them know what you want. That's the only way we can change how they act, I believe. Because regardless of any politician that gets elected into office, they're going to do what a politician does. And a politician is going to be a politician. And more likely is going to be looking out for himself while making everybody believe that he's looking out for his constituents. But that's all I got for this one. I want to thank everybody for watching. Hit that subscribe button if you don't mind. And be positive. Peace.